The wind that sweeps through the Khamar-Daban range is not like any other wind. It doesn't simply move, it whispers. It snakes between the birch trunks, slides over the moss-covered rocks, and sighs through the endless folds of fog that hang over the Siberian wilderness like ghosts that never left. In the summer of 1993, the wind carried with it the voices of 7 hikers, young, hopeful, and unaware that their laughter would soon echo into one of the most terrifying mysteries in modern history. They were not explorers or thrill-seekers looking for fame. They were ordinary people, students, friends, dreamers led by a woman named Lyudmila Korovina, a veteran mountaineer known for her strength and compassion. To those who knew her, she was more than a leader. She was a mother figure, the type of person who carried the weight of others when the path grew steep. The group set out in late July. Their goal was simple: to cross part of the Khamar-Daban mountain range, one of Siberia's most beautiful and unforgiving regions. It was supposed to be a test of endurance, not a dance with death. There were 7 of them: Lyudmila, the leader; Alexander, her assistant; Tatiana, a quiet but strong student; Timur, full of humor and energy; Victoria, gentle and optimistic; Denis, the musician of the group; and Valentina, the youngest, who had just turned 17. She idolized Lyudmila, wanted to be just like her. This was her first major trek, and she treated every sunrise like a small miracle. The world was open, the sky endless, and their path seemed to lead toward something pure and eternal. For the first few days, everything went according to plan. They walked through green valleys, waded across icy streams, and camped beside lakes so still that the clouds seemed to rest upon their surface. The Khamar-Daban region, nestled near Lake Baikal, is breathtaking in summer, but deceptive. Beneath its beauty lies a wilderness that can change its face in minutes. Calm can turn to chaos, sunshine to storm. Locals say that the mountains breathe, that they exhale mist when they are angry. It is a poetic warning, one most outsiders dismiss. Lyudmila had been there before, and she knew that nature here demanded respect. She watched the clouds closely. She read the air the way others read words. When the wind shifted, she knew it meant something. On August 2nd, the group met another team of hikers on the trail, led by one of Lyudmila's colleagues. They exchanged greetings, took photos, and joked about the weather. Everything seemed normal. The 2 leaders agreed to meet again after completing their separate routes. When the other group departed, they looked back and saw Lyudmila's team disappear into the mist, their colorful jackets swallowed by the pale fog that rolled down the slope like smoke. No one knew that this would be the last time anyone would see most of them alive. The next morning, the weather turned. Siberian storms are sudden, brutal, and merciless. Rain lashed sideways, wind screamed through the ridges, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. The hikers pressed forward anyway. They were experienced and they trusted Lyudmila. They moved carefully, climbing toward a plateau where they planned to camp before descending. Valentina would later say that despite the storm, the group stayed calm. They laughed, shared chocolate, and sang to keep their spirits up. But behind the smiles, they were exhausted. The rain soaked through their clothes, the wind cut into their faces, and the temperature began to fall. Still, Lyudmila urged them on. She wanted to reach the plateau before nightfall, believing the storm would pass by morning. When they finally reached it, the world was white. Mist surrounded them on all sides, and the mountain's silence pressed down like a weight. They set up camp, a simple tent in the open clearing, and gathered close for warmth. The night was long and restless. The storm refused to move. The air felt heavy, charged with something unseen. Valentina would later recall lying awake, listening to the strange sound of the wind, how it seemed to shift from a howl to a moan, almost like voices trying to speak through it. But fatigue won. She fell asleep to the rhythmic tap of rain on nylon, unaware that dawn would bring something far worse than any storm. Morning came gray and wet. They boiled what little water they had, shared a small meal, and prepared to move again. Then, without warning, Timur began to scream. At first, they thought he had slipped or burned himself, but his face twisted in panic. His hands clawed at his throat, and foam began to spill from his mouth. Lyudmila rushed to him, but before she could help, he collapsed. His body convulsed violently, then went still. Shock froze them. No one understood what was happening. Moments later, Victoria started gasping, grabbing her chest, her eyes wide with terror. She fell beside Timur. Within minutes, 2 of their friends were dead. Panic erupted. Lyudmila shouted for everyone to stay calm, but the air was thick with dread. Tayania began crying. Alexander staggered backward, muttering that he couldn't breathe. Valentina felt her vision blur, her chest tighten. Something invisible was crushing them. The sound of the wind grew louder, not like air anymore, but like a roar. Then Tatiana dropped to her knees, coughing blood. Alexander screamed her name, then turned and ran. He didn't get far. His legs gave out, and he fell face first into the mud, silent. In less than half an hour, 5 people were dead. Valentina could only watch in horror. Lyudmila was the last to fall. She was trembling, gasping, her skin pale as snow. Valentina tried to hold her, tried to understand, but the woman only looked at her and whispered something she would never forget. Go. Run. Then Lyudmila's body went limp. The rain began again, washing the color from her face. Silence filled the plateau. Valentina was alone. For hours she sat among the bodies, shaking, trying to wake them, calling their names through the storm. She was soaked, freezing, terrified. The cold bit into her bones, and the fog thickened until she could barely see a few feet ahead. She didn't know what had happened. Poison, madness, something else entirely. But she knew she had to leave. Taking only a small pack and a map, she ran downhill through the mist, slipping on wet rocks, branches tearing at her clothes. The forest swallowed her. She moved blindly, driven only by instinct and fear. Every shadow looked alive. Every sound felt like it was following her. For 2 days she wandered. She didn't eat, she barely slept. Her mind replayed the same images over and over. Timur foaming at the mouth, Victoria's wide eyes, Lyudmila's last breath. At night she thought she could still hear them. Faint cries carried on the wind, calling her name. The rain stopped, but the silence was worse. It was too still, too empty, as if the mountain itself was watching her. On the 3rd day, she stumbled upon a river and followed it, desperate for any sign of life. Her body was weak, her hands raw and bleeding, when she finally saw a cabin in the distance, an old wooden hunting shelter. She thought it might be a hallucination, but it was real. A fisherman found her collapsed near the door, barely conscious. When rescuers arrived, she could only whisper fragments of what happened, the screams, the blood, the sudden deaths. No one believed her at first. How could they? There were no signs of struggle, no injuries consistent with violence. When the search teams reached the plateau, they found the bodies exactly where Valentina said they would be. Positioned in unnatural ways, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. The official investigation concluded that the group died of hypothermia caused by exhaustion and exposure. But the photographs, the reports, and the survivors' words tell a different story. These were experienced hikers, well-equipped and led by a professional. The conditions, while harsh, were not deadly. What could make 6 healthy people die within minutes, their bodies convulsing, their faces bleeding, their lungs collapsing? What invisible force could sweep through the mist and end their lives so swiftly? Over the years, many theories emerged, some scientific, others strange. But in that moment in 1993, the only truth was fear. Valentina would never return to the mountains. She rarely spoke of that day again. But when she did, her words always ended the same way. It was like the mountain didn't want us there. And perhaps that is the most chilling part, that in a place as vast and empty as the Khamar-Daban range, something ancient, something unseen, may have simply opened its eyes for a moment and then closed them again. When the rescue team carried Valentina down from the mountains, her skin was ice, cold, her eyes vacant. She didn't speak for hours. The medics thought she was in shock, a natural response to trauma. But there was something different about her silence. It wasn't the dazed confusion of someone who had lost friends. It was the hollow quiet of someone who had seen something they couldn't explain. In the ambulance, when they asked her what had happened, she muttered only a few words. They screamed and fell. At first, authorities treated the case as a tragic hiking accident. The mountains had taken lives before, sudden weather, hypothermia, exhaustion. But as details began to surface, the story started to unravel into something darker. Valentina's account didn't match the pattern of exposure. She insisted the deaths were instantaneous, violent, and horrifying. No one simply froze to death in seconds. She described foam at the mouth, convulsions, eyes bleeding, symptoms that sounded more like poison than cold. The police scribbled notes, exchanged glances, and decided she must be traumatized. But when the search party found the campsite, their confidence began to fade. The scene was chaos frozen in time. 6 bodies, scattered across the plateau like fallen leaves. Some half-dressed or still clutching their gear. Lyudmila's body was lying face up, her hand outstretched toward the edge of the slope, as if trying to reach something or someone. The others lay in twisted, unnatural positions. Timur's face was contorted, his mouth open in a silent scream. Tatiana's fingernails were broken and bloody, as if she had clawed at the ground before dying. The rain had washed away most footprints, but there were enough left to show panic, some running in circles, others collapsing mid-stride. It didn't look like a simple accident. It looked like terror itself had chased them down. When the first reports came out, the official explanation was almost mechanical. The hikers died due to a combination of hypothermia, exhaustion, and disorientation. The wording was cold, deliberate, a line used too often to close cases in the wilderness. But the autopsy reports told another story. Several of the victims showed signs of acute internal bleeding, particularly in the lungs. There were petechial hemorrhages, tiny red spots under the skin and around the eyes, common in cases of asphyxiation or toxin exposure. Some had strange discolorations on their skin, a bluish-gray tint that didn't match frostbite. Others had foam around their mouths and nostrils, suggesting pulmonary edema, fluid filling the lungs, yet no external injuries were found, no broken bones, no signs of struggle or violence. The investigators were baffled. Whatever killed them, it happened fast and invisibly. The weather that day had been bad, but not catastrophic. Temperatures were above freezing, visibility was poor but not lethal. And Lyudmila, their leader, had survived far worse. The explanation didn't add up, but in post-Soviet Russia mysteries were often buried quickly. The case was closed within weeks, ruled a natural tragedy. But not everyone was convinced. Among the few who saw the original reports was a retired pathologist from Irkutsk named Dr. Leonid Gromov. When he read the files, he noticed something chilling. The symptoms described in the autopsy were consistent with phosgene gas exposure, a chemical weapon used in World War I. Phosgene causes the lungs to fill with fluid, leading to suffocation without visible trauma. He raised the theory that perhaps the hikers had stumbled upon an old military testing site where residual toxins remained in the soil or air. The area, after all, was not far from places used for Cold War research, but no trace of chemical contamination was found in the samples. At least, none were reported. Then came another theory, that of infrasound. Scientists had long debated whether low-frequency vibrations generated by wind patterns and terrain could cause panic, nausea, even hallucinations. It was the same theory proposed for the Dyatlov Pass incident decades earlier. Could the wind itself have driven the hikers into madness? It sounded far-fetched, yet the environment fit perfectly. A narrow plateau, steep drops, and powerful gusts that might create the eerie resonances associated with infrasound waves. Valentina's testimony about hearing or oaring and voices in the wind seemed to support it. Perhaps the hikers' fear wasn't from what they saw, but what they felt, vibrations below the threshold of hearing that ignited raw terror in the brain. But again, it was only speculation. Valentina, meanwhile, was trying to rebuild her life. She stayed quiet, avoided interviews, and refused most media attention. When she did speak, it was with measured calm, as if describing someone else's story. She said she didn't remember every detail, that her mind shut down after the first death. But certain moments came back to her in flashes, Tatiana's eyes rolling back, Lyudmila's trembling hands, the blood seeping from their lips. The investigators urged her to rest, to forget, but nightmares kept pulling her back to the plateau. Sometimes, she said, she could still smell the air from that day, metallic, sharp, and wrong. As the years passed, the story faded from newspapers, living on only in mountaineering circles and hushed conversations. But then, in the early 2000s, a wave of online interest in Soviet-era mysteries began. Dyatlov Pass, the Tunguska explosion, vanished expeditions. Among these discussions, someone rediscovered the Khamar-Daban case. Photographs surfaced as the hikers smiling in early shots, the recovered bodies lying in rows, faces covered with plastic. Internet forums lit up with theories. Some said it was the result of nerve gas tests. Others claimed they were attacked by locals. A few whispered of UFO sightings in the region during that summer. The renewed attention brought forward forgotten voices. One former search party member, an older man now in his 70s, revealed something he had never shared before. When they first reached the site, he said, they noticed that the surrounding vegetation was oddly burned, as if scorched by heat or chemicals. Small patches of grass were yellowed and dead in circular patterns. But by the time the official photographs were taken, those areas were cropped out or removed from the report. We were told not to mention it, he said. They said it would cause panic. There were also strange inconsistencies in the recovered gear. Some food items were untouched, while others appeared half-eaten, as if the hikers had stopped mid-meal. Their watches had stopped at different times. One of the cameras, damaged by moisture, contained an undeveloped roll of film. When processed years later, it revealed the last few frames, blurry, distorted, showing the fog and indistinct shapes in the distance. Some claimed you could see a figure standing in the mist. Others said it was just light and shadow, but for those who believed in the supernatural, it was proof that the hikers had not been alone. Despite the growing attention, the official position never changed. The regional authorities restated their conclusion. The deaths occurred due to hypothermia following exposure to extreme weather conditions. The words felt mechanical, lifeless, an echo of bureaucracy in the face of tragedy. But those who read the survivors' account, who saw the photos, who heard the whispers of the rescuers, they knew there was more. Something happened on that mountain that no one wanted to admit. In 2013, 20 years after the tragedy, a journalist named Irina Petrovna tracked down Valentina for an interview. The woman was older now, quieter, her hair streaked with gray. At first, she refused to talk, but eventually, she agreed on one condition, that Irina would not sensationalize her story. The interview lasted 6 hours. Valentina's voice trembled as she recalled the events, but her memory was sharp. She mentioned something she had never told the police, that shortly before the first death, she had noticed a strange taste in the air, like copper. Her lips had tingled, her head felt light. Then Timur began to scream. Irina asked if she believed it was poison. Valentina shook her head. No, she said softly. It felt alive. That phrase haunted Irina. It felt alive. She described it in her article as presence, unseen, intangible, but aware. Readers debated its meaning endlessly. Some dismissed it as trauma-induced hallucination. Others saw it as the clue everyone had missed. The human mind, after all, recognizes when it's being watched. Could the mountain itself, or something within it, have been aware of the hikers? As strange as that sounds, those who have stood in the Siberian wilderness understand. The silence there is unlike anywhere else. It's not empty, it's listening. The forests seem to breathe, the fog moves with intention. Even animals act differently, cautious, alert, as if sensing something that human eyes can't perceive. Perhaps that's why local legends speak of the spirit of the Khamar, a guardian that punishes those who enter its domain without respect. Older tribes warn travelers never to sleep on the open plateaus where the sky touches the earth. They believe that's where the world of the living and the world of shadows meet. By the time Irina's article went online, it reignited global fascination. Documentaries followed, amateur sleuths dissected every clue, and comparisons to Dyatlov Pass resurfaced. But the core mystery remained untouched. 6 lives lost in a moment of terror, 1 survivor haunted forever, and no rational explanation that fits all the facts. Even now, decades later, hikers who pass through the Khamar-Daban range claim they sometimes hear cries in the fog, distant but unmistakable, a chorus of panic carried by the wind. The locals avoid that plateau. They say the earth there never fully thawed again. And so the case stands, open in spirit, closed on paper. The mountain remains, silent and watchful, its secrets buried beneath layers of snow and time. For every new theory that emerges, another fades into the mist. And those who truly listen to the wind up there will tell you the same thing Valentina whispered before she left Siberia forever. The mountain doesn't forgive curiosity. It remembers. Time, they say, heals all wounds. But time for Valentina was not a healer. It was a mirror that refused to stop reflecting what she saw on that mountain. After the investigation ended, she moved away from Irkutsk, changed her job, and tried to fade into ordinary life. But the ordinary never came. For years, she lived in quiet towns under false calm, working at a local school, volunteering at a library, trying to fill her days with things that didn't ask questions. Yet every night, when the wind outside her window began to rise, she would freeze, listening. That same sound, that deep moan through the trees, would carry her back to that plateau where 6 bodies lay cold beneath the mist. She told no one, not her family, not her neighbors. But the memory was always there, breathing behind her eyes. In 1995, 2 years after the tragedy, Valentina received a small envelope with no return address. Inside was a faded photograph, her group, smiling at the trailhead, days before the climb. The picture had been in the investigation's files. She recognized the markings. Someone had sent it back to her. There was no note, just the photograph and a slip of paper with the words, "There with you." For the first time since her rescue, she felt true fear again. Not of the mountain, but of the thought that maybe the past wasn't finished with her. She burned the photograph that night in her sink, watching the faces curl and vanish in the flame. But the words on the note, faintly written in pencil, wouldn't burn. The ash scattered, and the letters still glimmered half intact. In the years that followed, she tried to forget, but in a strange way the world wouldn't let her. Whenever mysterious disappearances or mountain deaths appeared in the news, journalists reached out again, some polite, others predatory. They wanted to hear her story in her own words, or twist it into something that sold more headlines. She refused them all. She didn't want fame, she wanted peace. But peace was a luxury not meant for the survivor of something inexplicable. When she closed her eyes, the images didn't fade, they sharpened. Timir's face, Lyudmila's last whisper, the sound of rain mixing with screams. Trauma doesn't erase itself, it learns to wait. By the late 1990s, the incident had become a quiet rumor among hikers, a cautionary tale told in base camps and trail lodges. They called it the other Dyatlov. Some said the hikers had eaten poisonous plants. Others whispered that they'd been caught in a secret experiment, a Soviet relic hidden in the woods. There were even rumors that the group had stumbled into something sacred, a forbidden area marked by ancient symbols the government covered up afterward. But there was one constant in every version: the survivor. Her name carried a strange reverence, as if she'd become part of the mountain story, both victim and witness, forever trapped between 2 worlds. Then, in the early 2000s, the internet brought the story back from silence. Russian forums first shared the few available photos, and within months, it reached English-speaking audiences through translation threads. Titles appeared in all caps, THEDOPSIDACISTRTAGD, and suddenly, people around the world were dissecting Valentina's trauma as if it were fiction. They analyzed weather data, terrain maps, psychological theories. Some built computer models of the storm conditions that day. Others drew diagrams of the campsite, arguing over where each body fell. But the most unsettling corners of the web went further. They romanticized it. Creepy pasta adaptations appeared, adding ghosts and rituals, rewriting her story until it barely resembled truth. Her pain became a myth to entertain strangers. Valentina found out about this in 2005, when her niece, then a teenager, stumbled upon a YouTube video about the screaming hikers of Khamar-Daban. It used her photograph without permission. The narration dramatized her words, twisted them into something monstrous. They screamed and dropped dead, one by one, the voice said over slow, distorted music. Valentina watched in silence, her hands trembling. The video ended with a title card reading, "No one ever returned." That night, she smashed her computer. It was the last time she went online, but silence once again wasn't enough to bury the story. The world had changed. True crime enthusiasts began to call the case Russia's Lost Mystery. Podcasts, blogs, and amateur documentaries dissected every inconsistency. Some claimed to have found new evidence, weather anomalies, declassified military files, even alleged radio transcripts of the hikers' final day. Almost all of it was fake, but the myth grew faster than the truth could follow. For every lie corrected, two more were born. It was as if the story itself had become alive, mutating through retellings, feeding off curiosity. In 2008, a small film crew approached Valentina again, this time from Moscow. They promised respect, sensitivity, truth. They wanted to retrace the group's route, to show the world what really happened. No ghosts, no monsters, just reality. Against her own instinct, she agreed. Maybe, she thought, telling the story once, properly, could finally set it free. The crew met her in Irkutsk, and together they drove to the foot of the mountain. For the first time in 15 years, she saw the outline of the Khamar-Daban ridge against the horizon. It was just as she remembered, quiet, beautiful, and indifferent. She stood there for a long time, staring at the peaks through the mist, until she said, barely above a whisper, "It hasn't changed. It never will." The documentary, titled 7 Shadows, aired later that year. It was simple, respectful, and deeply haunting. Valentina spoke slowly, her voice steady but distant. She described the laughter of the first days, the storm, the confusion, the sound of the wind that seemed to speak. When the footage aired, viewers across Russia were transfixed. The documentary didn't answer any questions, but it reminded people that behind the myth was a real woman who had lived through unimaginable terror. The show earned awards. It also reopened the wound. Strangers sent her letters again, some kind, others cruel. "You should have stayed with them," one said. Another simply wrote, "What really killed them?" She stopped reading them after that. In 2010, new technology reignited scientific curiosity about the case. Independent researchers re-examined the weather reports from August 1993. They discovered something unusual, a sudden drop in barometric pressure at the exact location and time the hikers were presumed to have died. Such fluctuations could have created microbursts of wind powerful enough to generate infrasound waves, the same phenomenon once blamed for Dyatlov Pass. Some physicists argued this could induce panic, hallucinations, and irrational flight responses, exactly what Valentina described. Yet it still didn't explain the bleeding, the foam, the rapid deaths. Fear could drive people to madness, but it couldn't stop hearts in seconds. Others revisited the chemical theory. The Khamar-Daban range was known to have natural gas pockets deep underground, and during heavy rain, methane or hydrogen sulfide could leak to the surface. In high enough concentration, they could cause convulsions and respiratory failure without explosion. But again, no traces were ever found. Every scientific theory seemed to crumble against one impossible fact: the speed of it all. Death doesn't move like that unless something else is involved. And so, in the absence of certainty, the myth grew bolder. Some claimed the hikers had angered something ancient, a presence tied to the land. Online, stories began blending the Khamar-Daban case with folklore about the Whispering Peaks, a local legend older than recorded history. According to it, the mountains were home to spirits of those who died there, and their voices rode on the fog to lure others in. To those who knew Valentina, such talk was cruel. To those who didn't, it was entertainment. The line between tragedy and legend blurred until no one could tell where truth ended and imagination began. Valentina withdrew completely. She sold her house, moved to a smaller town, and began living alone near Lake Baikal. Locals knew her only as the teacher by the water. She walked by the shore every morning, collected stones, read in silence. Those who met her said she carried a calm sadness, not fear, but a quiet acceptance. When asked about the incident, she never denied it. She would simply say, "They're part of me." She never returned to the mountains. In 2013, when Irina Petrovna's article reignited public interest, Valentina was already ill. She gave no interviews, but one of her former students who often visited her recalled something striking. Sometimes she would stop mid-sentence, the student said, and look toward the hills, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then she would smile, not in fear, but as if recognizing an old friend, whether that was memory, delusion, or something else no one could tell. That same year, a group of young hikers filmed themselves visiting the site where Lyudmila's group had died. They posted their journey online. The video shows the fog creeping down the slopes, the sound of wind muffled by snow. The leader of that group later claimed that their compass spun wildly for several minutes near the old campsite, and that at night, they heard what sounded like shouting in the distance. They laughed it off at the time, but when they returned home, every member of the group reported nightmares for weeks. The video went viral, titled, "We Slept Where They Died." In one of her final recorded statements, before withdrawing completely from public life, Valentina was asked if she believed in the supernatural explanations. She paused, looked down, and replied, "I don't know what it was. Maybe it was natural, maybe it was not. But whatever it was real." That was all she said. Today, the Khamar-Daban range still draws hikers, climbers, and curious adventurers. The forest has reclaimed most signs of the tragedy. Only locals still whisper warnings that the mountain doesn't like being disturbed, that some places remember the blood spilled on them. Every few years, another traveler vanishes or suffers strange illness after venturing too far off the trail. None of it is officially linked. But among those who've heard the wind there, who've stood on the plateau where the fog moves like a living thing, they all describe the same uneasy feeling, as if someone is standing just behind them, breathing softly, waiting to be remembered. The world may have moved on, but the mountain hasn't. And somewhere, perhaps in dreams or in the cold wind that howls through the birches, the echoes of that long-ago scream still linger, faint but eternal. Because in Khamar-Daban, the dead don't fade, they whisper. And those who listen long enough swear they whisper back. By 2020, nearly 3 decades had passed since the Khamar-Daban tragedy. Most people had forgotten it, buried under waves of newer mysteries and digital distractions. But on certain forums, particularly those dedicated to unsolved disappearances and cold cases, whispers of the screaming hikers resurfaced. It began innocently enough. A user posted a scanned newspaper clipping of the original 1993 report, wondering aloud why there had been only one survivor. Within hours, the thread flooded with speculation. Why was there no public autopsy record? Why had the official case been marked closed so abruptly? The tone of curiosity quickly turned into obsession, and soon the Khamar-Daban case had been resurrected in the age of algorithms. That same year, a documentary filmmaker named Alexei Morozov, known for his investigative series on forgotten Soviet-era mysteries, stumbled upon Valentina's archived interview from 2008's Seven Shadows. Her hollow eyes and trembling voice haunted him. "They dropped one by one," she had said, her voice cracking. Morozov couldn't shake it off. He began digging through old Siberian records, digitizing forgotten reports, trying to trace every surviving document from the case. The more he found, the less sense it made. The hiker's route logbook mentioned equipment they never carried, timestamps that didn't match, and a missing field diary. Something had been deliberately erased. Morozov petitioned to access the original investigative materials still stored in the Irkutsk Regional Archives. It took 6 months of bureaucracy, but he eventually received permission. Inside the faded folders, the old handwriting in black and white photographs felt frozen in time, like relics from a world that had stopped breathing. The autopsy notes, though incomplete, were deeply unsettling. One read, "Foam present at the mouth and nostrils, convulsions prior to death suspected, no external trauma." Another noted, hemorrhaging consistent with asphyxiation, but no obstruction of airway detected. Morozov brought these files to modern pathologists for reanalysis. With access to new medical databases and chemical testing protocols, they revisited the forensic language. One detail stood out, the peculiar phrase, viscous white froth. The composition of such foam typically indicated pulmonary edema, fluid buildup in the lungs. But the cause remained a mystery. No toxins were recorded, no hypothermia, no altitude sickness. Something had caused their lungs to flood almost instantly. In 2021, Morozov released a teaser trailer for his new project, The Mountain Remembers. The response was immediate. Millions of views, thousands of comments, and a renewed fascination with the tragedy. Amateur sleuths, Reddit analysts, and professional researchers began collaborating in real time. They built digital elevation models of the Khamar-Daban Ridge, cross-referenced old Soviet topographic maps, and even simulated wind and humidity data from August 1993 using NASA's climate archives. For the first time, the investigation was no longer limited by distance or politics. The internet had made the mountain global. Then came the discovery that reignited everything. A retired forestry worker named Nikolai Berezov, living near Sludyanka, reached out to Morozov after seeing his teaser. He claimed he had kept something, a piece of film. "I was on a rescue team," he said. "They told us to destroy it. I didn't." When Morozov met him, Berezov handed over a small metal canister containing a damaged roll of film, still sticky with age. After professional restoration, several images emerged, the group smiling at camp, the mist rolling in, and, most chillingly, the final frame, a blurred image of the group's campsite, the camera tilted, the sky unnaturally bright. Behind the figures, faint white streaks appeared, vertical and jagged, like lightning without a storm. Digital analysts tried to correct the distortion. The result was disturbing. The streaks weren't light at all. They were vertical trails of condensation, resembling vapor plumes or sudden bursts of hot air. This detail reignited an old theory: microwave or energy discharge. During the collapse of the Soviet Union, numerous secret research facilities in Siberia were abandoned without record. One of them, only 60 kilometers from Khamar-Daban, allegedly tested high-frequency atmospheric probes. Could the hikers have wandered into a residual testing zone? Some argued yes. The electromagnetic exposure could trigger nausea, confusion, seizures, and internal bleeding. But others dismissed it as paranoia. The truth was, the files to confirm it were classified, sealed indefinitely under the Russian Ministry of Defense. Meanwhile, a team from Irkutsk State University conducted an expedition to the site using modern sensors and drones. They found remnants of the old camp, decayed rope fibers, aluminum cookware, and traces of synthetic fabric embedded in the soil. But they also recorded something stranger: unusual radiation levels. Low, but consistent, double the background average. The discovery was published quietly in an academic paper, but once online, it went viral. Within weeks, conspiracy channels claimed the hikers had been microwaved. Morozov was furious. His goal wasn't sensationalism, it was truth. Yet the internet thrived on exaggeration. Then in 2022, one of the most chilling breakthroughs occurred. Using satellite imaging archives, a European research team compared vegetation growth patterns over the region from 1990 to 2000. They noticed an anomaly, a circular patch of stunted growth roughly 40 meters wide, precisely where the hikers had camped. The soil, even decades later, showed signs of chemical alteration, as if scorched by something invisible. No fire residue, no human interference, just dead earth. When Morozov presented these findings in his documentary's second episode, it shook audiences worldwide. For many, it was no longer just a tragic survival story. It was a mystery of environmental and possibly military magnitude. But amid all the science and speculation, one haunting question remained unanswered: why did Valentina survive? Psychologists propose survivor's syndrome, sheer luck combined with mental endurance. Others suggested she may have been slightly apart from the group when the event occurred. But Valentina herself had once said, "I was with them when it began." Her words refused to fit neatly into any rational box. If something environmental killed her friends instantly, why didn't it kill her? In mid-2022, forensic anthropologist Dr. Svetlana Morova reopened Valentina's personal medical record, obtained through family permission. Hidden among the old papers was an overlooked blood test, taken 2 days after her rescue. Her red blood cell count was abnormally high, suggesting hypoxia, as if she'd been deprived of oxygen for hours. But more intriguing was a faint marker of methemoglobinemia, a condition where blood loses its ability to carry oxygen, often caused by exposure to specific toxins like nitrates or industrial chemicals. Could the group have encountered natural gas emissions from deep within the Earth, released by a sudden shift or quake? The Siberian Geological Service investigated old seismic data. On the day of the tragedy, a minor tremor was recorded 40 kilometers south of the ridge, too small to be felt, but enough, perhaps, to open a vent. A sudden release of trapped gases, hydrogen sulfide or carbon dioxide, could have enveloped the hikers. In a matter of minutes, the heavier-than-air gas would displace oxygen, leading to suffocation, disorientation, and collapse. That could explain the foam, the panic, and the rapid deaths. Yet one detail didn't fit the wind. Valentina had described it as violent, howling, unnatural. Gas wouldn't roar like that. As the investigation deepened, so did the contradictions. Every answer split into new questions. The mountain, it seemed, wanted to keep its secrets buried beneath layers of uncertainty. And then, almost symbolically, something happened. During a 2023 expedition to the site, filmed for the final episode of Morozov's series, the crew's recording equipment malfunctioned. Cameras froze, microphones emitted low-frequency hums, and drone batteries drained within minutes. They managed to capture only fragments, fog sweeping in from the east, shadows twisting through it, a sound faintly like breathing carried on the wind. Locals later claimed a storm had passed nearby, though weather stations reported clear skies. The footage, unedited, went viral within hours of release. To skeptics, it was a coincidence. To believers, it was proof that the mountain remembered those who disturbed it. The aftermath was chaotic. Tourists began flooding the region, treating it like a haunted landmark. Villagers warned them not to go. "You don't find peace there," one said. "You leave pieces of yourself." Within months, authorities closed off certain routes for safety reasons. But rumors spread that a small memorial had appeared near the old campsite. 7 stones, arranged in a circle, each carved with initials. No one claimed responsibility. When Morozov returned in secret later that year, the stones were gone. Only faint impressions remained, pressed into the soil, as if something had lifted them without a trace. In his final documentary voiceover, Morozov said, "Perhaps the Khamar-Daban tragedy was not meant to be solved. Perhaps it was meant to remind us that there are still places where nature holds dominion, where the earth itself can kill without reason, and where human curiosity becomes both the key and the curse." The screen faded to black, and the camera lingered one last time on the ridge, silent, veiled in endless fog. And yet, for those who've seen it, who've stood there in the cold air where the wind hums low and steady, the feeling is unmistakable. As though something is still there, unseen but aware, watching, waiting. Because in Khamar-Daban, the story never ends. It only sleeps until someone wakes it again. After The Mountain Remembers aired in 2023, the Khamar-Daban region became something else entirely, not just a remote wilderness, but a place of pilgrimage. True crime enthusiasts, paranormal investigators, hikers, and ordinary travelers began arriving in waves, armed with cameras, sensors, and curiosity. What had once been a forgotten Siberian ridge suddenly became a stage. The living tried to speak with the past. Hotels in Sludyanka reported full bookings for the first time in years. Guides began offering ghost treks, leading visitors along the same paths that Lyudmila's group had taken. They sold maps, badges, and even survivors' charms, small amulets carved with mountain symbols said to ward off fear. But the locals looked on with unease. To them, the mountain was not a mystery to solve. It was something ancient, something that demanded respect, not investigation. The first modern reports began quietly. In late 2023, a trio of hikers from Irkutsk uploaded a vlog documenting their overnight stay near the old campsite. The footage showed fog thicker than predicted by weather data, their voices echoing unnaturally in the mist. Around midnight, one of them claimed to hear a woman calling in Russian, "Don't go." The voice was faint, almost wind-like. They laughed at first, thinking it was the mountain playing tricks. But the laughter stopped when their drone, hovering a few meters above the campsite, captured a dark outline between the trees, motionless, tall, and slightly luminous. They posted the footage online under the title, "The Woman in the Fog." Within days it went viral, amassing millions of views and sparking heated debates. Scientists argued it was a light distortion caused by temperature inversion. Skeptics called it a hoax. But to those who had studied the case, one detail stood out. Valentina had once described seeing a similar figure just before her friends died, a shape made of air, watching from the tree line. As the story spread, so did the strange occurrences. A professional mountaineering group from Novosibirsk reported sudden equipment failure and directional confusion while ascending the same ridge in 2024. Their compasses spun erratically and GPS devices displayed false coordinates. One climber described a sensation of being followed. Though no other teams were present, when they returned they found scratches on their tent poles. Long, vertical marks cut deep into the metal. The local authorities dismissed it as ice abrasion. But when the group's medic analyzed the marks, he noticed something impossible: faint traces of heat, melting at the edges, as if the metal had softened before hardening again. Soon, social media overflowed with hashtags va Khamar-Daban Incident fa 7 shadows. Dozens of amateur investigators traveled there to film their own exposes, hoping for viral fame. Most returned with nothing but blurry fog and frostbite, but a few brought back things harder to explain. Distorted audio files, whispers on frequencies no human voice should reach, and video static that formed faint outlines of faces. Scientists offered rational explanations: radio interference, electromagnetic distortion, psychological suggestion. Yet the people who experienced it spoke differently. They described it as presence, awareness, something that noticed them. Meanwhile, psychologists began studying a curious phenomenon among those who had visited the mountain, a condition they started calling Khamar-Daban syndrome. Symptoms included vivid nightmares, flashes of light when closing the eyes, and a constant feeling of being watched. The syndrome wasn't officially recognized, but its cases multiplied. Several patients, when interviewed, mentioned hearing the same phrase in their dreams: "Don't look back." None of them knew each other. None had ever spoken with Valentina Yudachenko. In early 2025, a new expedition attempted to recreate the hiker's journey exactly as it had been in 1993. The team of 6 scientists, equipped with oxygen monitors and protective suits, aimed to test the gas emission theory once and for all. For 3 days, everything went according to plan. On the 4th, their radio transmission grew erratic. The leader, Professor Lebedev, reported unusual barometric fluctuations. Then silence. Search teams found them alive, disoriented, shaking, unable to recall the last 12 hours. Their camp had been abandoned mid-meal. The data from their instruments was corrupted, filled with high-frequency noise. When analysts later filtered the sound, they found something unnerving buried beneath the static: a faint human scream, drawn out and echoing, as if trapped inside the frequency itself. News outlets picked up the story. Overnight, the forgotten hike trended across Russian and Western media alike. Commentators called it the modern Dyatlov, a haunting reborn. But for those who had followed the case from the beginning, it felt like something more than coincidence. It was as though the mountain itself had decided to speak again, through interference, through madness, through echo. The old tragedy was being replayed, not in blood this time, but in repetition. Every few decades, the pattern returned: fear, curiosity, silence. Then another echo. Even Morozov, the filmmaker, returned to the mountain once more in 2025. By then, his documentary had become an international phenomenon. He was older, tired, but still restless. He wanted closure, one final image for his follow-up series. He set up camp exactly where Lyudmila's group had. His camera recorded him talking to the lens. "If they're still here, I want to understand." Not to disturb, just to listen. He left the camera running overnight. The next morning, the equipment was found several meters from the tent, covered in frost. Morozov himself was safe but shaken. It wasn't a sound, he later said in an interview. It was pressure, like the air around me was alive. When the footage was examined, experts noticed that between 3:14 and 3:00 a.m., the camera's microphone captured a low droning pulse, a rhythm so deep it bordered on infrasound. It matched no known natural source. Below it, almost imperceptibly, was a woman's whisper. The translation was debated, but one linguist swore it said, "It's cold. We're still here." By then, the story had crossed from tragedy into folklore. Online communities romanticized the lost hikers, calling them the Seven Shadows. Artists painted their faces in glowing mist. Filmmakers turned the tale into horror anthologies. But amid all the myth-making, one truth persisted, that 7 young people had died inexplicably, and one had lived with the memory forever. The humanity of it, the raw sorrow, often got lost in the spectacle. In 2026, a memorial was finally built near Slodianka, a quiet stone monument engraved with all 7 names. Locals still visit it in silence, leaving candles and pine branches. On windy nights, the sound of the forest passes through the cracks of the monument, producing a low hum. Not quite a melody, but not random either. People say it sounds like breathing. Others say it's the mountains sighing, but those who stand close enough to listen swear they hear faint words, "Stay warm. Don't go higher." By then, Valentina had passed away. Quietly, in her sleep in a lakeside home, she was 53. No official obituary mentioned Khamar-Daban, but those who knew whispered that she often spoke to the wind before sleeping, as if updating someone on her day. Her niece found her old diary, sealed in a box. Inside was one final entry, dated only months before her death. "I dream of them still. They're not angry, just cold. I hear them sometimes in the mist. I think they've forgiven the mountain. I hope it forgives me." Her diary was never published, but copies of that entry spread online, reigniting the case once again. The circle of fascination, horror, sympathy, obsession began anew. It seemed that every time someone tried to bury the story, it returned stronger, deeper, more entangled with the collective imagination of those who heard it. Khamar-Daban was no longer just a place. It had become an idea, the embodiment of how mystery refuses to die. And yet, beneath all the theories and documentaries, one simple, unsettling thought lingered among those who studied it closely. What if the hikers' deaths weren't an accident, or an experiment, or a natural event at all? What if it was something intrinsic to the mountain? Something alive in its soil, its air, its memory. A phenomenon that waited for those who dared to disturb its silence. Even now, hikers who visit the ridge speak of strange sensations, sudden dizziness, whispers in the fog, compasses spinning without cause. Some leave offerings at the site, bits of cloth, stones, or food, as if acknowledging an unseen host. Whether superstition or respect, it seems to bring them peace. But every so often, a traveler vanishes. Search parties find nothing, only a trail of footprints leading up, fading into mist. The locals have a saying now. When the wind howls over the lake and the fog rolls down from the peaks, they say, "The shadows are walking." And if you listen long enough, you might hear them too. Not in words, but in rhythm, like a heartbeat buried under snow. The mountain remembers. And in that remembrance, it whispers the oldest truth there is, that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only respected. By 2027, the Khamar-Daban tragedy was no longer just a Siberian mystery. It had become a global obsession. The internet had transformed the story into something alive, pulsing through every corner of digital space. Forums dissected it, podcasts dramatized it, and YouTube channels built careers on decoding the secrets of the mist. What began as an obscure Soviet-era hiking incident was now a shared myth for the modern age. A true crime ghost story wrapped in the language of science and the aesthetics of fear. It started when a Western streaming platform released The Cold Summit, a 6-part docuseries inspired by Morozov's earlier work, but filmed with cutting-edge technology. The producers used high-altitude drones, AI-enhanced sound reconstruction, and digital simulations of body temperature patterns to recreate the hiker's final hours. Viewers described it as hypnotic, terrifying, and heartbreakingly human. The series ended with a single chilling line whispered over a snowy ridge. "They're still up there." It trended globally for weeks, crossing into meme culture, reaction videos, and even virtual reality adaptations. Soon thousands of amateur researchers joined the hunt. Online communities mapped every square kilometer of the Khamar-Daban Ridge using satellite imagery. Reddit threads reached tens of thousands of comments, some claiming to have found anomalous heat patterns or energy spikes near the old campsite. A few users even organized virtual expeditions using AI models to simulate the hiker's path, weather conditions, and oxygen levels. Their findings were eerily consistent. No logical explanation could fully align with the timeline Valentina described. Something always remained off. A few missing minutes here, a misplaced footprint there. Theories multiplied like wildfire. Some argued it was a secret military experiment involving acoustic weapons or psychotropic gas. Others leaned toward geothermal emissions, rare natural vents releasing toxic compounds that induced panic. Then came the psychological contagion theory, suggesting that hysteria had spread among the group, turning fear into a physical killer. Each theory had evidence, and yet none fit perfectly. And every time one was debunked, the mountain seemed to answer with a new whisper, a new clue, another hiker's strange experience. Documentaries turned into debates, debates turned into rituals. People began visiting the site not to solve it, but to feel it. They wanted to hear the silence, to sense what the hikers had sensed. Some stood in the exact spot where Lyudmila's tent once stood, whispering words of respect, as if afraid to break the fragile air. Others recorded soundscapes of the wind, comparing them to archived data. When slowed down to 1/10 speed, the audio sometimes revealed tonal fluctuations that resembled human breathing. Skeptics dismissed it as pareidolia, the human tendency to find patterns where none exist. But believers called it proof of presence. Then came the story that reignited everything. In the winter of 2028, a Swedish travel vlogger named Eric Dahl set out to film a solo expedition to the ridge. His version of Facing the Unknown. He was a skilled mountaineer, equipped with every safety protocol possible. His YouTube teaser showed him smiling, standing beside the sign that marked the start of the Khamar-Daban Trail. "This," he said confidently, "is where the mountain keeps its secrets. I'm going to find out what they are." He never returned. 3 days later, rescuers found his camp. His camera lay beside the tent, lens cracked, battery drained. Inside the tent were his boots, untouched meal packs, and a journal open to a single unfinished sentence. "The wind sounds like." The rest was a jagged line, as though the pen had been yanked from his hand. The footage recovered from his camera showed nothing unusual for the first day: scenic slopes, snowfields, his cheerful commentary. But on the second night, something changed. He began whispering instead of speaking normally. "It's too quiet," he murmured in one clip. "The trees aren't moving, but the air is." Later the video cuts to static, a faint rhythmic pulse underneath, the same one Morozov's camera had once captured years before. For 5 minutes, the frame shakes violently, and a blurred white shape moves across the background. Then silence. The video leaked online within a week. Millions watched, dissected, argued. Some claimed it was staged for publicity. Others saw genuine terror in his eyes. The final freeze frame, Eric staring at something off-screen, expression hollow, became one of the internet's most circulated images of the decade. Hashtags exploded: Thelast vlog, Farikamarako Fithi Mountain Speaks. Russian authorities launched an official investigation, citing natural causes. Yet no conclusive report was ever published. It didn't matter. The myth had already consumed the facts. Within months, tourism to the region doubled. Merchants sold echo stones, small polished rocks said to carry the mountain's vibration. Online stores offered scented candles labeled the mist, promising the feeling of cold fear and reverence. Influencers made stylized videos wearing hiking gear and staring into fog. Using Eric's final image as inspiration, what was once sacred grief had turned into digital spectacle. beauty born from tragedy, consumed for clicks. But even amid the noise, a quiet current of genuine curiosity remained. Scientists from Japan, Germany, and Canada formed a joint expedition called the Atmospheric Memory Project. Their goal was not to prove or disprove the supernatural, but to study the psychological impact of isolation and fear. They installed sound sensors across the ridge, recording frequencies from 0.1 to 20,000 Hz. On certain nights, they detected low-frequency oscillations with rhythmic patterns, too structured to be random, but too irregular to be mechanical. When played through speakers, the vibrations caused nausea, anxiety, and sudden chills in observers. The team concluded that the mountain itself emits infrasound capable of triggering primal fear responses in humans. But one scientist, Akira Tanaka, went further. He proposed that these infrasounds might store emotional residue from traumatic events, effectively replaying the fear of those who once perished there. His peers called it poetic nonsense. But Tanaka's notes, later published, contained one disturbing sentence: "If fear leaves an echo, Khamar-Daban is still screaming." That line resonated worldwide. It was quoted in articles, used in songs, even printed on shirts. And yet, beneath all the commercialization, something deeper stirred, a recognition that some places hold memory not in stone or soil, but in frequency and silence. In 2029, a British radio host produced a live broadcast from near the site, calling it Voices from the Ridge. Listeners from around the world tuned in as the host described the frozen expanse, the thin air, and the eerie stillness. Midway through the stream, faint interference crackled through the speakers. A single burst of static followed by what sounded like overlapping voices. The host froze, whispered, "Are you hearing this?" And then silence cut the feed. When the broadcast resumed seconds later, the sound was gone. Analysts later confirmed that the signal had not originated from any known frequency. The broadcast became legendary, replayed endlessly in conspiracy circles. By 2030, the line between documentary and myth had dissolved completely. The Khamar-Daban Incident was no longer about 7 hikers and a survivor. It had become a mirror, reflecting humanity's hunger for the unknowable. For every skeptic who dismissed it, another person found meaning in it. It spoke to our shared fear of the unseen, the unexplainable, the possibility that nature remembers what we try to forget. Universities began offering seminars titled Fear Ecology and The Psychology of the Mountain. Artists painted the hikers as spectral guardians of memory. Musicians sampled the infrasound recordings in dark ambient compositions. Even video games adapted the story, turning the ridge into a digital labyrinth of sound and snow. The myth had found new life in pixels and code. Yet the emotion remained the same, awe mixed with dread. And through it all, the fog on the real mountain kept rolling in, thick and endless. Locals reported that, at certain hours before dawn, the wind carried faint music, not human, not mechanical, but layered, almost harmonious. A geologist who stayed there for a week described it as a choir of air. He said that once you heard it, you couldn't unhear it. It followed you home, echoing in your dreams. The Khamar-Daban story had begun as a tragedy, but by the end of the 2020s it had become something far more, a living, breathing entity woven into the world's collective consciousness. A reminder that not all answers comfort us, and not all mysteries should be solved. The hikers' names had become symbols of curiosity, fear, and the fragile boundary between science and the supernatural. And perhaps that's the greatest irony. In trying to understand the mountain, humanity became part of its story. Every article, every theory, every whispered retelling added another echo to its endless memory. Because Khamar-Daban doesn't just remember those who died there. It remembers everyone who ever tried to listen. By the early 2030s, the Khamar-Daban story had begun to cool. The digital blaze that once set forums and news feeds alight was flickering out, buried beneath new tragedies, new mysteries. But the mountain was patient. It waited as the world moved on, holding its silence like a blade under the snow. What brought the world's attention back wasn't a film or another theory, it was a discovery. A simple, accidental uncovering that rewrote everything people thought they knew. It began in the summer of 2032, when a team of climate researchers from the Russian Academy of Sciences arrived to measure permafrost retreat. They weren't ghost hunters, thrill seekers, or storytellers. They were scientists armed with ground-penetrating radar, drones, and satellite uplinks. Their purpose was to chart the effects of rising temperatures on the ancient Siberian soil. But on the third day of their expedition, the radar detected a foreign object beneath a slope not far from the Kurovina group's last recorded position. Something metallic and angular, wedged deep within compacted ice. The team assumed it was leftover Soviet equipment, perhaps a weather station fragment or aircraft debris. Excavation was slow. The permafrost resisted their drills like stone. When the ice finally gave way, what emerged was small, a cylindrical container about the size of a thermos, its surface etched with serial markings no one recognized. It was sealed airtight. Inside, they found something even stranger, a strip of magnetic tape wound around a rusted spindle, partially degraded but still legible. At first, it looked like an old field recording, an environmental log. Maybe. But when the researchers played it in camp that night through a portable reader, the sound that filled the tent froze every breath in the room. There was wind, heavy and low, moving through what sounded like trees. Then, faint human voices, indistinct, layered, rising in panic. Someone screamed. Another voice shouted, "Get down," followed by static and a rhythmic pulsing noise almost mechanical. Then silence, a single breath near the microphone, and a woman's voice whispering, "Don't listen." The researchers stared at each other. The timestamp on the label matched August 1993, the week the Kurovina group vanished. Word of the find spread quickly, first through internal reports, then online. Within days, journalists descended upon the Khamar-Daban range, demanding access. The government sealed the area for ecological preservation, but leaked snippets of the recording began appearing across the internet. Each version was slightly different, some longer, some distorted. Listeners claimed to hear hidden messages in the static names, screams, even their own breathing reflected back at them. Audio engineers attempted to clean the recording, layering filters and AI reconstructions. What emerged was worse. Beneath the surface noise lay a pattern, a low-frequency oscillation repeating at regular intervals. It wasn't random. It was a signal. When the frequencies were mapped into a visual spectrum, they formed a jagged waveform resembling a heartbeat. The media dubbed it the pulse. Soon, everyone wanted to know who recorded it and why. Valentina Yudachenko, now in her 60s, was contacted for comment. She refused to listen. "If that tape is real," she said, "it's not from us. It's from them." She didn't elaborate. Theories multiplied again. Some said the cylinder was an abandoned military monitoring device, capturing ultrasonic data from experimental weapons testing. Others suggested it was a black box prototype, part of a secret aviation project unrelated to the hikers. But a few noticed something chilling. The voice whispering, "Don't listen," matched Valentina's own vocal profile from archived interviews. Had she, somehow, recorded it without remembering, or was it an imitation? An independent analysis by a Swedish sound lab complicated things further. The ambient frequencies within the tape, specifically the subsonic layers, corresponded exactly to those identified by Tanaka's atmospheric memory project years earlier. The signal wasn't mechanical, it was geological. The mountain itself had recorded the sound. As absurd as it sounded, the data supported it. Shifts in pressure, temperature, and mineral density within the frozen strata could, in theory, act like a primitive phonograph, capturing vibrations and replaying them under the right conditions. If that were true, the tape might have contained the mountain's own memory of the event. The revelation reignited everything. Documentaries returned, scientists debated, and once again the ridge filled with visitors. This time, though, the tone was different, reverent, almost fearful. They weren't trying to solve the mystery anymore. They were trying to listen. In 2033, a new expedition, part scientific, part spiritual, was organized under the name Echo Return. 20 volunteers from 10 countries traveled to the ridge, equipped with high-sensitivity microphones, electromagnetic readers, and personal log cameras. Their leader, Dr. Elena Korsakova, a climatologist turned anthropologist, described it as an attempt to document human response to natural fear. But her journals later revealed another motive. She believed the mountain was a repository, a consciousness of collective trauma, slowly thawing as the earth warmed. On the 6th night of their stay, the team recorded the same pulse pattern found on the tape, only this time it was emanating from the air itself, audible without instruments. The sound rose and fell in intervals, rhythmic, deliberate. It wasn't loud, but it could be felt, in the stomach, in the teeth, in the bones. One member described it as slow breathing of the earth. 2 days later, the expedition ended abruptly. When the support helicopter arrived for extraction, it found the camp deserted. Equipment was intact, food uneaten, all 20 members were missing. The only clue was Dr. Korsakova's notebook, found near the tent flap open to the final page. Written in hurried pencil strokes were the words, "We finally heard it clearly. It isn't calling for help, it's calling us home." For weeks, rescue teams scoured the surrounding valleys. Not a single trace of the researchers was found. No footprints, no gear, nothing. Satellite scans revealed unusual heat signatures in the snowfields, patterns that mirrored the waveform of the original recording. By the time authorities declared the search closed, the Khamar-Daban Ridge had claimed 27 lives, 7 in 1993, 1 in 2028, and now 20 more. And yet, the mountain remained silent. The aftermath fractured the public. Some blamed government cover-ups, others spoke of a natural phenomenon beyond human comprehension. A few insisted that the missing weren't dead but absorbed, their energy added to the mountain's voice. Online, people began referring to the region as the resonant zone. Tourism ceased. Even locals stopped approaching the slopes after dusk. Travelers spoke of new signs erected near the trailhead, PRIBTD, CACTVE, DONELISTTOTGEOND. Despite the warnings, the legend grew stronger. Audio samples of the pulse circulated endlessly. Musicians embedded it into songs, spiritualists used it for meditation, skeptics used it for sleep studies. Yet almost everyone who listened reported the same experience. Dreams of snow, footsteps, and distant laughter fading into static. Some claim that, in those dreams, the laughter always ended with the same whisper, "Don't listen." By 2034, researchers confirmed that every copy of the pulse recording gradually degraded after repeated playback, no matter the format. Even digital versions corrupted mysteriously, waveforms dissolving into white noise. It was as if the sound didn't want to be heard. A year later, Valentina Yudachenko disappeared. Neighbors said she left her house in the middle of the night during a snowstorm, wearing her old hiking coat. Her diary, found later, contained only a single note: "The mountain remembers. It's waiting for the last of us." Her body was never recovered. That winter, satellite footage captured an unusual occurrence over the ridge. A glowing atmospheric anomaly, circular, rotating slowly above the same coordinates where the pulse had been recorded. It persisted for 7 minutes before vanishing. The world argued, as always. Science called it ionized moisture reacting to magnetic interference. Believers said it was the mountain exhaling. But to those who knew the story, it felt like closure or warning. The following spring, a final article appeared on a small independent website run by an anonymous researcher. It analyzed all available data, cross-referencing every known detail from 1993 to 2034. Its conclusion was quiet but unsettling. The Khamar-Daban Ridge may not be cursed or haunted. It may simply be alive in a way we do not yet have language for. After that, the story faded again into archives, documentaries, whispered retellings. But now and then during cold nights in Irkutsk, locals say the wind still carries a faint rhythm, a low pulse hidden between the gusts. Those who live nearby no longer try to explain it. They simply pause, bow their heads, and wait for it to pass. Because in the end, some echoes are not meant to be solved. They're meant to remind. And as long as the Khamar-Daban stands beneath its eternal mist, it will keep whispering its lesson that the earth, like memory, never forgets those who dared to listen. There are stories that fade with time, their edges softened, their names forgotten, their meaning diluted by the years. But the Khamar-Daban Incident has never truly faded. It lingers like frost in the lungs of those who dare to speak of it. Every generation finds it again, redresses it with new theories, and still comes away unsettled. It refuses to rest, as if the mountain itself won't allow it. Even now, decades after that first group vanished beneath its shadow, the ridge remains untouched, a scar of ice and stone, preserved by nature's indifference. Satellite maps label it, tourist boards avoid it, but for those who know, it's something else entirely. It's a wound that never heals, a frequency that keeps echoing. Because what happened there was more than death. It was contact. Not between the living and the dead, perhaps, but between the human heart and something vast, ancient, and unfeeling, something that listens. To stand at the edge of Khamar-Daban is to feel that listening. The air hums with low pressure, heavy and slow, like the mountain is inhaling. Every sound seems to stretch. Your breath, your heartbeat. The crunch of snow beneath your boots. Until it no longer belongs to you. It's as if the world is borrowing it, holding it, replaying it somewhere deep beneath the frozen soil. That's what the locals say now. The mountain doesn't speak, it records. It records every footstep, every shout, every drop of blood or breath of fear that ever touched its surface. And when the air is right, when the temperature dips just enough, when the wind comes from the north, it plays those sounds back. Not to haunt, not to warn, but to remember. The scientists who once studied it are gone now. Their instruments rusted, their data archived, their theories forgotten beneath newer mysteries. Yet their notes remain, filled with quiet awe and dread. One of them, Dr. Tanaka, wrote a final entry before retiring. We came here searching for truth, but found a mirror. The mountain didn't kill them. It reflected them. It gave fear a voice. Perhaps that's what makes the Khamar-Daban story so horrifying. Not that it's unsolved, but that it feels alive. Every explanation, no matter how rational, leads to something deeper, something that refuses to be contained by science. The moment you think you've grasped it, it slips back into the fog, taking a piece of your certainty with it. It's not a ghost story or a legend. It's a memory loop, a cycle of curiosity and consequence, forever replaying. And in that cycle lies the most human truth of all. We are drawn to what frightens us because fear is proof we're still alive. The hikers, the researchers, the dreamers who followed, each was searching for meaning in the void, something to confirm that their lives mattered. And maybe, in the mountain's endless silence, they found it. Valentina's words echo hardest now. Before she vanished, she told a journalist, it wasn't evil. It was listening. At the time, no one understood what she meant. But now, as the years have stretched thin, those words feel prophetic. Perhaps the mountain wasn't a killer at all, just an ancient recorder of moments too intense to fade. A vessel for echoes that humans are too fragile to carry alone. Sometimes, hikers still pass near the lower trails, though few go far. They leave offerings, coins, ribbons, old compasses. For the 7 who never came home, some claim to feel warmth in the air, like invisible eyes turning toward them. Others hear it, a faint rhythm under the wind, not quite a voice but not silence either, like breath caught between worlds. There's one story told by a ranger stationed nearby. He said he met a lone traveler one evening, an older woman, silver hair, eyes pale and sharp as frost. She asked him for directions to the ridge. When he warned her about the dangers, she smiled softly and said, "I know the way." The next morning, there were no tracks leading back from the mountains, only a single note pinned to a tree, damp with snow. They're all home now. The handwriting matched Valentina Yudachenko's. After that, no one spoke her name aloud in that valley again. But the story, her story, continued to move through the world, carried by every retelling. It appeared in languages she never knew, across screens and speakers and whispered prayers. Each version slightly different, but always ending the same way, with silence. Because even the storytellers eventually pause, listening for the thing that listens back. In 2035, a final expedition, a quiet one, was sent by the Russian Geophysical Union. Their mission wasn't to uncover or explain, but to record natural resonance frequencies for historical preservation. They placed a single microphone deep within the ridge's core, shielded from the wind, powered by solar relay. It transmitted continuously for 90 days. Most of the data was unremarkable. Wind, snowfall, occasional animal movement. But in the final hour of the recording, before the batteries failed, the sensors detected something new. A sustained vibration between 18 and 20 hertz, perfectly symmetrical. When converted to audio, it resembled the cadence of human breathing. 2 breaths in, 1 out, then a pause, then, faintly beneath the layers of static, a whisper. Experts argued endlessly about what it said. Some herb, others home. But a linguist from Moscow who had studied the hikers' original journals claimed it was a single word, repeated twice. Remember, remember. And maybe that's the truest ending to this story. Not a conclusion, not a revelation, but a message from a place that has seen everything, taken everything, and still remains. Because memory itself is its own kind of haunting. We carry the weight of the things we've lost, and sometimes they carry us back. The Khamar-Daban Ridge is proof that there are places in this world where the boundary between life and echo blurs, where time loops like a heartbeat, and every silence hides a memory waiting to wake. So, if you ever find yourself standing on a quiet mountain, surrounded by snow and mist, and you feel the air change, heavier, stiller, charged with something unseen, don't speak, don't move, just listen. Because somewhere out there, in the frozen expanse of Siberia, a mountain is still breathing, still recording, still waiting. And if you listen long enough, you might just hear it listening back.